Lovely. Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started straight away, but I think some more people will join. But we've got a lot to cover today, and I'm just so delighted to be hosting this session for National Apprenticeship Week. My name is Julia Oertli. I'm with the Social Mobility Commission. And really, thank you all so much for spending your lunchtime with us today to talk about apprenticeships and social mobility. I should say straight off that we're recording this session so that you can watch it in your free time and so that we can share it with everyone who was really keen to attend today but wasn't able to make it. So you'll find it later on through our media channels, and we will send you a link afterwards as well in case you want to share some of this content with your colleagues. So I'll give you a really quick overview of what we're going to do in the next hour and a half. We will just tell you a little bit about us first, who we are, and get a sense of where you're at in your journey with apprenticeships and think about social mobility. Then I will give you a really kind of top line summary of some of the findings from our research on apprenticeships and social mobility. And share some of our recommendations and the kind of support that we and others offer in this space for employers wanting to do more. And then we'll have a panel discussion with 4 experts to help us make sense of some of the insights. And finally, we'll have about half an hour in group discussions so you can meet others who are keen to progress in this space and share examples and insights from your practice to find ways of incorporating some of this. First off, I want to offer you a definition of social mobility, the way we understand it here at the Commission. So we see it as the link between a person's occupation or income and the occupation or income of their parents, meaning we want to ensure that somebody's background doesn't determine their future. And we, as a Social Mobility Commission, are an arm's length independent body. Our function is to monitor and advocate for social mobility. That includes providing advice to ministers. But we also run delivery programs like this one, where we support employers who are keen to do what they can to create a more inclusive and diverse workforce. Before I say more, though, we would love to get a snapshot of you, all of you employers calling in today. And we'd love to do this using a little tool called Mentimeter. So you can either use your browser here or do this on your phone. Both are fine. And for those of you calling in on the phone, I'll just read out the way this works. So you can go to www.menti.com. And then you'll be asked to type in a code, so you don't have to sign up or anything. You just put in the code 247816. And that way it should pop up a question asking you about apprenticeship starts in your apprenticeship program. Now, if you don't run apprenticeship programs yet, feel free to skip it. But this will be really good to kind of help us get a sense of people's practice as it is now. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a minute so I can show you the live results as they come in from everyone. So just give everyone a minute. And my colleague is kindly posting this in chat as well to help you access the survey. So got some of your first results coming in. So it's a really simple question. It's about whether you analyze current apprenticeship starts by socioeconomic background in your organization. Yes, no, or don't know, or doesn't apply. So give this a minute for people to answer. I've got a couple of yeses, a few no's so far, a couple of don't knows. So hopefully everyone can see the results coming in. Excellent. And I should also say there's no judgment here, it's completely anonymous. So it's just to help us get a sense of where people are at in their practice. Okay. So currently we've got a lot more no's than yeses, which makes me think you're all in the right place. Because we want to share some tools and practices and resources with you today to help you make it easier to track and measure this kind of thing. Okay. I've got a couple more questions, so I'll move on to the next one, which is about a recruitment target for apprentices from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. Do you currently have that in place or not? Okay, there seems to be a similar picture emerging here with quite a lot more people saying they don't have targets in place yet. Yeah. Okay, really interesting. And also, this is completely unscientific as well. So I'm probably moving on a little bit too quickly for everyone to participate if anyone's having problems accessing this. But don't worry at all. This is just really to get a little snapshot to inform our conversation. Great, thank you. So let me ask you the last question then, which is just more about your judgment of the apprenticeship programs you're running currently. Oops, people have already responded to this, excellent. So this is about whether you think that your current apprenticeship offer targets the people who would benefit the most, which from our research shows that people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds do really benefit more than advantaged peers from completing an apprenticeship. Oh wow, there's a lot of optimism here. That's really lovely. Okay, so most people really believing that that is happening, which is great, really encouraging. Some not sure, a minority believing they don't. Okay, so I hope we'll be able to offer something to everyone here to take away from this session. But thank you so much for playing just with these 3 questions to give us a starting point for where you're at. Okay, so let me go back to the slides then. You're probably all here because you believe, like we do, that apprenticeships can be a really powerful tool for social mobility. They can be a great opportunity for people to earn a living while they learn and train in a new profession. They are an excellent alternative to academic-based study. They can offer a second chance for people who are a bit older. They can offer opportunities for retraining for people who were employed in declining industries, and they're a brilliant way to address the class pay gap. So this is so much potential and a lot of hope, but the reality is that this isn't really happening. So what we have found as we've been looking at this for some time now is that often employers and others assume that apprenticeships kind of deliver social mobility by default and that they're a natural vehicle for that. In practice, however, apprenticeships must be supported by inclusive practices. Otherwise, they might reinforce the same kind of disadvantages that we see in other cycles of employment. And let me give you a picture of what is happening. And I'll do this by sharing kind of 4 insights from our research that look at different stages of the apprenticeship journey. So starting with who actually gets into apprenticeships in the first place, we have found that since the apprenticeship levy began in 2017, the same kind of patterns have been repeated around apprenticeships being offered to people who already have access to a lot of opportunity. So we found that 36% fewer apprentices from lower socioeconomic backgrounds were getting into apprenticeships, and particularly affected, and particularly those who face the highest barriers are women from disadvantaged backgrounds who are above age 25. Then once people get into apprenticeships and do make it through the door, we found that people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds are offered lower quality apprenticeships. So we found that just 16% of degree apprentices, which is the fastest growing track of apprenticeships, were from disadvantaged backgrounds. And even at the same level, we found a quality gap between apprentices from lower and higher socioeconomic backgrounds. Then once people have completed their apprenticeship, we found that apprentices from lower socioeconomic backgrounds were overlooked for progression opportunities routinely. 63% of disadvantaged male apprentices complete their apprenticeship compared to 67% of others, which might sound like a small margin, those 4%, but at a national level, that's a really significant difference. And then finally, once people go into the labour market after their apprenticeship, apprentices from lower socioeconomic backgrounds have lower career earnings. And this is particularly important to remember, because at the same time, it is exactly those people who benefit the most from having done an apprenticeship. So we found that actually people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds get a 16% boost in their earnings versus 10% for everybody else after they've completed an apprenticeship. Some of the apprentices that we spoke to for this research really kind of highlighted how without programs and interventions that specifically target this, they would not have been able to access these opportunities. So here's Liam, who won a place on the Freshfield Stephen Lawrence Scholarship Scheme, which targets Black men from less socially mobile backgrounds in commercial law firms, and was saying that without that opportunity, he wouldn't have been able to do this, and fears that other people might fall through those gaps unless programs like this are set up at a large scale in different industries. And you're all here as employers and as people who really have the power to make a difference in this space. So what I'd love to do is give you a really kind of brief one-page summary of some of the recommendations and some of the areas in which you can really make a contribution to shift the dial on this. And this will be a lot of content in a short space of time, but don't worry, we're going to send you the slide deck. In fact, I believe my colleague has already sent that out to you, so you can, for those of you calling on the phone, you can access the slides on your own screen. And we'll also link you to a lot more information that we have on our website. I wanted to give you a whistle-stop tour just to give some food for thought for the rest of the conversation we have today. Right. So starting with outreach, targeting people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds for your apprenticeship programs from the start, from the get-go, is really critical. So for example, that could include targeting social mobility cold spots geographically. It could include providing outreach programs in partnership with schools and further education colleges, as well as offering career experiences for people age under 16. That's really critical. In terms of hiring, really recruiting for potential is key. So removing qualification requirements, focusing on potential rather than polish in the way you frame your adverts and the way you design your application process. Offering candidates financial support with things like travel expenses to get to interviews or other expenses they incur during the application process, and using contextual recruitment. So really understanding the qualifications and experiences people have received within the context where they happened. When people are on their apprenticeship, offering really high quality support is critical. So building in flexibility for home working, for example, which I'm sure a lot of you are doing at the moment anyway, looking at flexibility in terms of a location and the way the job is designed. Paying a fair wage is absolutely critical. Using mentors to support people through their journey, especially if they're new to work or new to an industry or institution. Offering things like shadowing opportunities for other roles, other departments in your organization, working with partners. There's plenty of providers that offer support to both you as an employer as well as your apprentices. Work with them, draw on their support. And that could include offering extra tutoring, for example, for apprentices that might need support with English and maths at level 3 of their apprenticeship. And then progression pathways. So this is really key for social mobility because it's not just about completing an apprenticeship, it's about what happens after. So building a pipeline of apprenticeships from level 2 up is a brilliant way of enabling people to progress through your organization. Providing further training, so really ensuring that those opportunities are open for self-selection, that you have your managers talk to your staff about training opportunities regularly, and that you kind of cultivate a culture of learning in your organization to encourage everyone to take part. Data underpins all of this because if you don't know the socioeconomic background of your workforce is very important. It's very difficult to know who is not represented or who's overrepresented. So measuring that data from both your applicants as well as the people who are offered a place on your apprenticeship program is really key. And then using that data to inform any changes that you make to your program design. And finally, the wider ecosystem within which these apprenticeships occur. So particularly for the large employers in the room, you can use your levy to transfer some of the funds that you have to people in your supply chain. For example, if you have suppliers that are located in social mobility cold spots, that's a really brilliant way of supporting them to do the same work with their staff. And I want to say just a couple more words about the data collection point, because that's often a stumbling block for many employers who don't know where to start, who've never collected this kind of data before. And we've got a lot of support and put together a mini toolkit to help you do this well. And the other thing is that it doesn't have to require a lot of resource or time. So there is one key question that we have identified from our research that employers can ask to give them a really good idea of people's socioeconomic background. And that is the question where about the occupation of someone's main household earner when they were aged 14. We've got a breakdown here of the different categories that people can select. You can use this for a small survey or as part of people's application form. And what you can then do is categorize this into the 3 sort of buckets of background. So you have working class, intermediate and professional. And again, we have guidance around which professions fit into which category. And then you can look at this and compare it to the benchmarks nationally to see whether your workforce and your apprentices that apply for your program are representative of the wider population. So for example, 42% of the population roughly are from a working class background. And you can kind of use this to see whether in your own staff pool that is overrepresented or underrepresented, and the same for the other categories. And what you can also do is then take this data and break it down according to the different apprenticeship levels that you might offer. You can look at completion rates, so who actually finishes and who might drop out. You can see who progresses, who, for example, gets a pay rise, or who is offered a promotion, who might move on to another level apprenticeship. And you can kind of track what happens to people after they've completed by background. And this, again, is really, really helpful information to inform the design of your program and to make appropriate interventions. What I also want to say on this, though, is that trust is really important when you ask people to disclose that kind of data. And there's a few things to consider here that we just wanted to share with you briefly. So offering people clarity about why you're collecting this data and what it's for is really important to drive up response rates. So being clear about whether people can be identified from the data that they provide, how it will be stored, and where will it be stored separately from their personal details, for example, so they can't be identified. That's really important to kind of give people confidence that it's going to be used appropriately. Being clear about who will have access to that information, whether people might be contacted as a result of what they provide. We generally discourage this, but there might be some instances in which that is needed, and what your anonymity threshold is. So we generally, as a rule of thumb, suggest not going lower than 10 respondents, because you'll be able to identify people from that kind of small sample. And finally, sharing examples of how collecting this data has led to changes in your organization. Or if you're starting out fresh, perhaps you can use an example of another employer who has used this data to improve their program, or you could share your aspirations, what your vision is, why you're collecting it in the first place. So there is lots more information on all of this on our website, socialmobilityworks.org/toolkit/measurement, particularly on this part, but we have a whole toolkit that includes information and guidance and support resources on all different aspects of the employer journey. We also have an organizational directory, which is searchable by topic and location. So you can find providers and other organizations to support you, to support your apprentices, to offer all kinds of insights to really help you move this forward. The toolkit I've mentioned. And finally, we also have a lot of case studies on our website of other employers who have gone through this journey already, who are willing to share their experience and their insights. So you can feel less alone and learn from each other and be encouraged by all of that. Right. So I have talked quite a lot and given you a lot of food for thought, I hope. As I said, we're going to share these slides, and what I'd like to do now is warmly welcome our panelists who will help us make sense of some of this and dive a bit deeper into some of the aspects I've mentioned here. So please join me virtually in welcoming our lovely panel of experts. We have Jessica Ogonigweki, who is one of our social mobility commissioners at the Commission, and has been working with providers to make apprenticeships more inclusive. We have Eddie Fletcher from the Ministry of Justice, who is head of social mobility there and former lead of on apprenticeships. We have Norma Miambo, who's Lieutenant Commander at the Ministry of Defence and works on armed forces apprenticeship policy and programs, as well as Tom Pritchard, who is from Amazing Apprenticeships, who works to connect schools and employers and improve their understanding around apprenticeships. So welcome to my lovely panelists, who I invite to switch on their cameras so you may be seen by everyone. Thank you so much. Hi,
Julie. If we've got a question, do we ask it now or do we wait and ask the panelists? Because I've got a question, I send that across to you. You may not have seen it.
I won't have seen it, so thank you for mentioning. Is it about some of the content I've just shared?
It is, yes, on the one big question.
Yes, please, go ahead. We probably have time to take one.
I looked at the category that you put on there, but it doesn't seem to capture those who may be refugees or asylum children of asylum seekers, or even second-generation immigrants, because of the questions that you've posed on there. How does one capture such information, and would such information be useful in doing what you seek to address with the one big question?
Thank you so much for that question. I'm actually going to put that very quickly over to our expert on data, Lindsay, who will be able to answer that better than me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that question. There's also another question in the chat about that one key question, so I'll try to wrap very quickly answers to both. So the short answer is we don't consider refugees in that because what we're measuring is parental occupation. So what we would be after, for example, on a refugee somebody who has come to the country, we would still be looking for them to answer for us what did their parents do, you know, prior to becoming a refugee. I think if employers are interested in knowing refugee status, that would need to be a separate question, because it's trying to measure something a little bit different. What we're just trying to do with that one key question is just get a sense of what your background is. And so additional measures looking at those kind of slightly different angles, which, as the question suggests, is important and absolutely impacts your prospects in the UK. Massively important, but a slightly different thing. And for a measurement perspective, we need to be clear that each question only measures one thing. The other question in the chat is about, are we sure that this really is the best question? And surely, you know, parents' highest level of education or type of school is also important. We are 100% confident this is the right question. This is the key question. We did a big consultation last year on this question to try to simplify it and make sure that it was fit for purpose. We released a data kit last November, which you can find on our microsite. Hopefully one of my colleagues can pop the link to the measurement page in the chat so you can look at it. If you want to dive deeper, we have all the backstory of that consultation in a report. But the simple answer is that one key question is the best way to measure socioeconomic background. Things like type of school attended, they get at something slightly different. They don't get quite at social background. So please do make sure that if you are asking anything, which you should be, really should be, if you are not going to take anything else away from today, please take away the importance of data and measurement. And please make sure to use that one key question when you're asking your apprentices their socioeconomic background. Hopefully that answered that, and I'll hand back over to Julia.
Thank you, Lindsay. And I wish we had much more time, because I'm sure there's more questions. What I encourage you to do is take them to the breakout discussion, which we'll come to after the panel. And you can also email us after, and hopefully some of the questions will be answered by the content we have on the website. But do keep them coming in the chat, and we'll do our best to get back to you somehow. So, my lovely distinguished panel, I would love to have a conversation with you to help us identify and sort of dive a bit deeper into some of the barriers that exist that people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds face when they apply for, enter, progress through apprenticeships, as well as some of the support that employers can put in place to mitigate against them. And I would love to start with you, Jess. You did an apprenticeship at BBC Radio 1 some time ago, so you can speak from that direct experience, and that included a really competitive application process. I was wondering, drawing on that experience, as well as being a social mobility commissioner for the past 2 years, whether you can talk to us a bit about what you have seen to be some of the both visible and invisible barriers that people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds face in the apprenticeship journey.
Yes, so hello everyone. I guess the first thing is definitely how well an apprenticeship is advertised. For me, if I wasn't like extremely proactive at finding this particular apprenticeship, I would have definitely missed the deadline, because also there was such a short window of application. So I guess that kind of heightened how important it was. I think I found it, even though I was being really proactive, pretty much the day before, and it took me hours to fill in. So it was a really also text heavy application. And that automatically comes to me as a barrier. So for people who find it really hard to write, might not understand the questions, there was a lot of questions. In fact, I kind of thought as I was going through, wow, like this is definitely going to put people off. I can't see many people actually completing it. And then after I did that application, I had to do another one to sort of get through the next round. And then I had an assessment day in Birmingham, which was quite problematic for me, because I didn't, at the time, my socioeconomic background was low, and I didn't actually have the money to afford to go to Birmingham on the train, and there wasn't any bursary support, so I had to ask my friend's mum, which I found quite embarrassing at the time, for some money to go get the train. And then when I was there, it felt very competitive, so I felt like I had to compete against everybody else who was there, and it kind of felt like it was more maybe perhaps a negative environment, because I was feeling like I had to compete against other people rather than necessarily teamwork, which I think would have been perhaps more positive in that environment. And also, I think there's obviously a distinction between people from those socioeconomic backgrounds and that sort of level of confidence and aspiration. And I think that to be in such an environment, it's really hard to sell yourself.
Thank you, Jess. Thank you. And we'll come back in a minute to kind of also look at what the barriers are sort of once you are on the apprenticeship and in that environment. But thank you so much for highlighting some of those key ones for us. I would like to go to Tom next. Tom, you work with employers of all sizes, helping them with the design of their apprenticeship programs. From that employer's perspective, what do you see as some of the common challenges that employers have faced when trying to address some of the barriers that Jess just outlined for us?
Yeah, hi everyone. So yeah, really quickly for context, I think like Julia says, we're best known for working with schools, I think, among people who do know us, but we also do a huge amount of work with employers, specifically around connecting them with audiences and improving visibility for them with schools and with young people. So I think specifically in terms of that sort of outreach and hiring piece and challenges, barriers for employers there are definitely a common set of challenges that come up time and time again. A big one is reaching sort of diverse and disadvantaged groups. So how to specifically target relevant schools in key geographies for employers is a big one. But also reaching people once they're outside of the schooling system can be a challenge. Employers often struggle with how to then speak to those groups once they do have a way of connecting with them, and with addressing barriers or issues that they might be facing with sensitivity and with confidence. That's often just because there's not a conscious awareness of what some of those barriers might be, some of the things that Jess just touched on there. I think high dropout rates during applications is a challenge. Sometimes that's due to the time that an application process can take. You know, long multi-stage application processes can get in the way for people who perhaps need to be in paid employment as soon as possible. Or sometimes it's because stages in the process aren't designed to work for the most disadvantaged people in some way. They're not accessible either in terms of technology, or as Jess just mentioned, they're not designed to work well for people who perhaps, for example, don't like sort of very text-heavy tasks. I think a lot of employers also find, particularly bigger employers that perhaps are household names, find that people from less advantaged backgrounds often end up self-selecting out during of applying at all, even for entry-level roles. So we do a lot of work with Parliament, and they really struggle because, I can't remember, 80% of their apprenticeships maybe are trades-based. They need plumbers, they need electricians, they need builders, but people see Parliament on an advert and think, you know, that's not for me. Cultural, sort of familial or social biases against apprenticeships in diverse and disadvantaged groups is a big one. I think things need to change on a number of fronts. I think we've talked before about what the big things that need to change might be, and I think from businesses' points of view, the most helpful thing is really just sort of buy into addressing this agenda at every level of the business. So having a willingness to listen and learn and platform diverse voices and hear what they have to say is an essential starting point, but really it's about having people in on the ground floor and right up in decision-making positions who are willing and motivated to drive real change. And that's why conversations like this one, I think, are so important.
Thank you, Tom. Yes, and I hope we can make a small contribution towards that with this workshop. I realize actually for the recording's purposes, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. So hopefully, as you're speaking, you'll be captured a bit better. So I would love to go to you, Norma, next, because the armed forces provided quite a different context from perhaps the experience that, for example, Jess had at BBC Radio 1. Some of the barriers that she touched on, such as travel expenses, or maybe clothing or accommodation, are automatically covered for your apprentices. And the armed forces represent a completely different model, whereby apprenticeships are kind of part of the DNA of the organisation. Can you tell us a bit more about what that looks like and what other employers might take away from that experience?
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for having me on today. And the armed forces, in the way we deliver our apprenticeships, is very different, because we don't recruit apprentices. So what we recruit is soldiers, sailors, airmen, airwomen. So we recruit people to come and do a particular job. And as part of their job, they get the apprenticeships built into the training that they need. And therefore, for us, everybody who's involved in that knows that the apprentice is not only an apprentice, but first and foremost, they are a member of the team, they're a member of the armed forces, whichever service they belong to. So it's integral in that. And we have the individuals who build these, the apprenticeship standards. To look at them, we deliver exactly the same as any other organization, whether it's small, medium enterprise or other big organizations. So we're delivering the same apprenticeship standards within what we're delivering. And we've been doing this for a very long time. So we're a mature organization. So for context, at any one time, we have about 20,000 apprentices on program. So that is quite important to know, that everybody recognizes that and knows what it is they're looking for. And we offer a wage. The individuals are given responsibility very early on, and therefore they know that what they're being given is the package, the value that the organization places on them. And people that work with them and who they work for were also apprentices. So there isn't that thing that separates an apprentice wherever they are, in whichever organization they're working, which job they're in. There is no difference, because everybody does an apprenticeship. So in our recruits, or over 94% of our recruits will be doing an apprenticeship when they join, because it's part and parcel of the job they do. So that is why we say it's in our DNA, because if you turn around and say you don't want to do the apprenticeship, it means you don't want to do the job. So that's a different psyche, and it's a different perspective to bring to it, to focus on the job and not the fact that you're an apprentice.
Thank you so much, Norma. And I'm really glad that you're here to offer us that perspective of really seeing apprentices as the same as any other member of staff. So Eddie, I want to come to you because you have been leading on the social mobility agenda in the Ministry of Justice, and done a lot of work formerly on apprenticeships, putting in place support structures specifically for people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, including looking at providing suitable progression opportunities for them once they have completed their apprenticeships. So can you share a bit more with us about what that has looked like and what you have done?
Thanks, Julia. I will do. I think, firstly, can I just say, can you put the screen back on so you can't see my face? But I fear that would not be allowed. Okay, so let me just frame this in one quick statement about why are we trying to employ more people from low socioeconomic backgrounds. So for an organisation like ours, large organisation, we need the best people at all levels of our organisation from all backgrounds. Having that diversity of thought, that brings that innovation to the organisation. Now, at the moment, we don't have that to the level that we want. So using apprenticeships to bring people in from all those different types of backgrounds is critical. However, having just that apprenticeship on its own is not the answer for us. It's about what are those support structures and those mechanisms that we can put in place to enable those people who come from lower socioeconomic backgrounds as well to progress in the organisation. And we know from the research, Dr. Sam Friedman's research tells us that there's 17% less income from people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. That equality of opportunity in terms of progression through an organisation is not there for people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. So the learning that we've got it's a package. You've heard from the Ministry of Defence. They have an awesome approach where it is the whole thing. You come in, you do the apprenticeship, that's your learning, and then you work through the organisation, so you're there for the period. My advice to all employers at every level is you're employing your future through apprenticeships, and it is about putting those supporting progression processes in place. So just a few things that we've done in the Ministry of Justice is sponsorship and buddying and mentoring, critical to allow people to understand the unwritten barriers. So, we talked about the barriers getting into the organisation through apprenticeships, how we can reduce those. But once you're in and how to progress, it's about reducing those barriers, those unwritten rules, making sure that people have got an understanding how to act as they go through the organisation. So using the apprenticeship as the launch pad to a certain extent, but then putting processes in place to enable those apprentices to get through the organisation will make your organisation, make them what we call future-proofed. That is critical in that process.
Thank you. That's brilliant. Thank you, Eddie. Jess, coming back to you, what Eddie just described from what you've shared with me about your apprenticeship experience, none of those support structures were in place for you. And I can imagine, particularly going into a sector like broadcasting, there's a lot to learn. Can you share a bit with us about what the lack of support, what impact that had for you as you were going through your apprenticeship?
Yeah, of course. So I think the main issue was that the whole organisation, as in the floor that I worked on, I don't think they knew what apprenticeships were. And I don't think that they knew that we were actually coming into the building. So instantly there was a complete lack of understanding between how knowledgeable we were, how much experience we had, and what was kind of expected of us. So sometimes I'd spend 2 weeks just making tea and coffee. And then the other 2 weeks I would just be thrown into situations that I had no idea how to do, like behind a camera in the Radio 1 Live Lounge or filming Chris Evans' breakfast show, having no idea how to operate a camera. And it was sort of those high pressure situations, which I think are probably quite unique in broadcasting because the turnover is quite quick, but it was kind of like also how they communicated with each other, because I didn't know what to do and I was frequently responded by in like high pressure, shouty, I guess, communication, which wasn't really good for my confidence, I think, going into a completely new environment for me. So I think also not having, I guess, that one person to go back to and confide in and really speak to, I was constantly sort of shifted around into different places. So I don't think I actually had enough time to really learn in a department and grow necessarily with all the tools I needed for afterwards when I wanted to get a job, say, in broadcasting afterwards. Yeah, I'd say those were kind of the main bits for me.
Thank you so much, Jess. Norma, can I kind of come to you on that point around, so what Jess has described is that there's a lot of learning that needs to happen, and the armed forces specialize in training people. So what that might involve sometimes is actually supporting people to kind of learn on the job, and as well as fail sometimes. Can you share more with us about what that involves from an employer's perspective?
Thanks, Julia. So it's right, we are a training organisation, learning organisation. We're always training, aren't we? We're always learning. So that is another thing that is ingrained within us. It's really important to bring out the fact that for our apprentices, whilst they're on their training, the support network is also there, whether it's from their peers, whether it's from their chain of command, or whether it's from the apprenticeship training organisation. And here, this is why I bring in the single services, the Royal Navy, the Army, and the Royal Air Force, where they've got that organization in place that is there to ensure that that support is available for all those apprentices going through, and they can find the information they need. We find about, you know, the self-fulfilling prophecy. An apprentice for us will want to make the next cohort better than theirs was. So there's always people wanting to change for the better what they had. They'll bring out what didn't work and why it didn't work and bring it back into the system so that those coming through next time can get that. So if you put the apprentice at the heart of the learning and why they're doing it, that's where you get it. And we get really good completion rates because our programs are not elective. That's the other thing. So because they're not elective, you're doing it because you need it for the role. It's testament to the value the organization places on that apprenticeship and the training, and therefore provides the support in order to help individuals, whichever background you come from, because it doesn't matter whether you've got a degree or you've got an engineering or you're coming from low socioeconomic background, everybody gets the support that they require to fulfill their potential.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I realized I forgot to ask Jess, because we've talked quite a lot about the challenges that you had on your apprenticeship, but of course there was also things that were really good and supportive, and I just wanted to give you a chance to share some of that with us, so you don't get a completely skewed perspective here.
Yeah, of course. No, I am extremely grateful. I think that throughout when I was a child, I always wanted to work at the BBC. So I think it was amazing seeing people from like EastEnders and my favourite presenters just in the building. I think when you're able to speak to people that you aspire to so much that also look like you, it really gives you just like an abundance of motivation to do well. Even though sometimes I was definitely thrown into the deep end, and I think at times it did affect my confidence. There were also times where I was in situations where I had learnt further on and I was put in positions of responsibility that was a confidence booster for me, because I felt like, wow, I can't believe like just 6 months ago I didn't know how to operate a desk, and now I'm operating a live show of one of my favourite presenters. So there was definitely great bits, and of course I still work at the BBC now as a BBC Earth Kids presenter, so even though it was years on, there's definitely things I took away from that. Now I guess there's just some things I think everyone can take away to make somebody's experience just maybe a little bit more supportive or a little bit better.
Absolutely. And almost shared some tips with us for what that might look like. Before we sort of head towards our breakout discussions, I want to ask Tom to help us answer a question that often comes up in these conversations, which is, what if you're a smaller employer with less resources and you do really want to make a change in this space? Tom, you've done a lot of thinking and work around this. Can you share some advice to smaller employers who want to contribute to this agenda?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll sort of try and keep it fairly tight and practical as well, because it's a bit of a rabbit hole, I think. I think it's really important to realize that sort of culture change, so improving inclusivity, improving a company culture, doesn't have to mean a big capital spend project. It doesn't have to mean throwing money at a problem. And we've seen many, many times that actually it can often be easier for an SME to adapt culturally than it is for a sort of large, complex, slow-moving employer. And there are real advantages. So, for example, SMEs are often better placed than large organizations to sort of leverage their position in the local community. That was certainly the case for us as a small company in lots and lots of scenarios. Relatively recently, in the before times, we worked with a local school and requested a work experience person from them, and asked them for someone who wasn't a sort of typical high flyer who was going to succeed regardless. And they sent us someone with a troubled home life, a difficult background, at risk of going into care. And they're an absolutely phenomenal, if temporary, addition to our team. You know, they brought a huge amount in terms of new perspective and outlook and life experience and skills. And then they went back into school, and the experience was sort of very sort of energizing and eye-opening for them as well, because they had taken that step into the world of work and knew they could do it, knew they could thrive. I think the key here is always comes back to sort of nailing this down to having an awareness of what you can practically influence from a cultural point of view, from the position you're in. So as an apprenticeships, early careers, HR professional, it's such an important point that Amazing Apprenticeships, we've built a program for employers around this called the Genie Program. It's not a sales pitch, but it really sort of walks people through how to start addressing things. And for employers of all sizes, for SMEs specifically, there are practical accommodations that someone in an HR or apprenticeships position can make relatively quickly and easily to things that are within their remit, so attraction and recruitment processes that can make a real difference. So things like explicitly including information in job adverts and social posts about accommodations for disability, for neurodiversity, some of the things you mentioned earlier, Julia, flexibility once you're in post, working around school hours or holidays, pay, things that are really fundamental for people looking for work. I think making job description skills or character or potential based rather than experience or qualifications based is a huge one. There's a whole conversation going on at the moment, which we're very much on board with, around whether sort of maths and English formalised requirements need changing with a lot of training providers. I think they do, but we won't go down that rabbit hole now. Maybe asking applicants to fill in a skills-based template rather than submit an open CV. Providing shortlisted applicants with questions ahead of time to give them time to prepare. And I think a big one that we come back to time and time again is remembering that it's a sort of mindset shift, and remembering that you're looking to hire people who will add to your company's culture and not just who will fit into it. So it sounds simple, but it can be a big ask. Realistically, you're never going to get that sort of depth and breadth of experience that Eddie mentioned in your team to properly benefit as a business if you're only hiring people who look and dress and talk like everyone else in your team. So that's a huge piece, huge sort of unconscious bias piece. Again, another rabbit hole to get into there. But yeah, hiring people who will add to your team, not just who will slot comfortably into it.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. Such great advice. Thank you, Tom. And I want to give everyone else on the panel a really quick chance to share any kind of takeaway message for employers listening in today or watching this later. What would be your top tip or any kind of message that you want people to definitely remember from today? Can we start with you, Norma?
My top tip is attend events, network with people to get that information, and have passion, want to do this.
Lovely, thank you so much. Jess, what would be yours?
I would say to try and make the application process a little bit more exciting, maybe have different channels of doing it, whether it's like a video entry for the people who do still want to do text entry, do that, but just alternative ways to try and make it a bit more engaging and to get more people on board rather than them just getting really overwhelmed by the first hurdle.
Brilliant. Thank you. And Eddie, you are getting the last word here.
It's never a good thing to give me the last word. I have many. I think just again, as everybody spoke, it's a holistic approach to using apprenticeships to improve your organisation. It's about getting that organisational structure that is best fit for the future. If it just looks one way, it's only going to go one way. You've got to have an organisation that has a diverse thought process, a diverse, approach to bringing people in, progressing through the organisation, and then that diversity to succeed.
Words of wisdom. Thank you all, everyone, so much on the panel for sharing your insights and experience with us. And I think we have one hand up, so let's just take one question because we want to also give you time to discuss with each other. We've got one hand up from Julie Day Charles. If that still stands, feel free to come in now and ask your question to the panel.
Hello. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
My question is, there are lots of organisations out there, many from who are led by Black and Brown community groups or represent them. Now, they have the mentoring programs, they have the advocacy programs. Even myself have developed a program for government. And it really frightens me when we all come together like today. Although it's a positive move, it frightens me that why has it taken so long to get there? I know that we've got the Ministry of Justice on here, and I've done some work with them on mentoring, but it, you know, we're talking about back in the day when there was the Bradley Review, which he would remember that. And it's taken such a long time because a lot of the people that we're trying to reach are actually now in prison and the mental health system. And a lot of them are Black and brown men. And I think that if we're going to do anything that's going to really provide people with another or enhance people's lives, it's being honest about how do we co-produce with them apprenticeships. It's really important that co-production is seen as a must. And co-production means very much around developing programs with those that are going to be prospective users. And that hasn't happened yet. And that's something that I'm hearing from Jess. And I think that we really do need to take a good look at how we communicate with each other in order to develop programs to reach the most diverse and socially excluded communities.
Thank you for that, Julie. Jess, did you want to respond?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's I think often the one group of people we miss out when we look at how to improve things is the people who are actually taking part in it. And I think that anything to do with the reforms of apprenticeships needs people who were maybe put off by apprenticeships to tell us why, and people who've had those journeys tell us, you know, what was good about it, what were the barriers in order to improve it. I completely agree with everything you just said.
Thanks, Jess. And Eddie, do you want to kind of come in as well? Did you mention?
Yeah, I'll try to answer the many questions that Julie raised there. I think you're right. I think, why is it taking so long? I think we are moving in the right direction, definitely. Social mobility has been on the government agenda now for the last 4 years. I think if you look at what's happened in those 4 years, it's slow. We're an organisation of 420,000 people. It's going to take time. But if you look at the changes that have been made, they are definitely going in the right direction. The government inclusion strategy released by Michael Gove next month, it talks about social mobility. Then they're talking about double disadvantage. So it's not just about one protected characteristic, it's about many protected characteristics. And it's about the social demographic background of those people who are coming through the organisation. I think it's slow, but it's a steady increase in pace. And we do try to work with, you know, I'm not going to try and defend everything that the government does. Please don't make me do that. However, you know, on social mobility, we are working with a lot of different third sector organisations, a lot of different apprentices. They're just one element of it. So I think you're right. The challenge is good. I like the challenge. We're trying to meet that challenge. And I think, you know, come back in another 4 years' time and see how much of a different place we're in then.
Well, and with all of that critical thinking and questioning, and thank you, Julie, for also bringing in that kind of intersectional perspective to this work. We would love to invite you to spend 25 minutes with some other folks on the call today to exchange ideas and raise more of these kinds of questions. And I'm really pleased that we have, because there's so many of you today, we have another sort of faculty of social mobility and apprenticeship experts that we've convened to help kind of guide some of those conversations. So you will see one of these faces in your breakout room, and we will see you back here in about 25 minutes to wrap up together. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Anna. And perhaps you can hear from Catherine as well, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. So we talked about the measuring of data of not just apprentices currently employed by yourselves, but actually throughout that application process. So right from the beginning, kind of knowing who's accessing those opportunities and successfully acquiring an apprenticeship as an employer.
Great, thank you so much. There's such a wealth of information and insights and points that you've all raised. And we're going to try and do our best to collate that into a sort of after pack that we'll share with you after, as a kind of summary that you can go back to and perhaps share with any colleagues or use to start conversations in your organization. So what that leaves me with is to thank you so much for joining us today and being part of this movement, we like to call it, for your energy and commitment. We run these kinds of masterclasses regularly. The next one coming up is on outreach. This is not specifically on apprenticeships, but a lot of this applies, of course, as well. And we're doing that in partnership with PwC on the 25th of February. We'll share this link after as well, if you'd like to register. And please stay in touch with us. We are posting on our website any upcoming events. We blog, we're on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram. You can find us everywhere. So thank you so much, and we'd love to see you again. Have a lovely rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Right.
Bye.
Thank you.